Welcome, Eden, when the world was still. Hello, friends. Tonight we step into the beginning, a world untouched by pain, a garden planted by God Himself. It was a place of light and laughter, where rivers ran like song, and every living thing breathed peace. Here man first opened his eyes to the face of his Maker. He walked among the trees with purpose in his step, carrying the image of God like flame within clay. He was given dominion, not to conquer, but to care. Every creature bowed to his gentleness. Every corner of creation waited for his voice. And yet, within this beauty, choice also lived. Love, to be real, must be free. And freedom, when tested, must reveal the heart. In this garden, love would be tested. A whisper would come among the leaves, and trust would falter. The dust that had once received breath would learn what it means to ache. But even as the curse unfolded, grace began to move. The same hands that formed man would one day clothe his shame. The same voice that called him to rule would call him again to return. For mercy was not an afterthought. It was woven into creation from the start. Tonight, we will walk through it all, the beauty, the dominion, the fall, and the first act of grace. We will see the tenderness of a God who corrects without abandoning, and the hope that still shimmers east of Eden. So wherever you are listening from, let the day release its hold. Let your breath slow, and your thoughts become gentle. There is no hurry here, only wonder, the wonder of a world that began in love, broke through choice, and was met by grace. Rest here for a moment. The garden awaits. Before time began, there was only God. No sky, no sea, no sound, only the still fullness of His being, complete, radiant, and unhurried. The universe was not yet a place. It was an idea in His heart. Heaven and earth waited inside His will, like a melody waiting for the first note. Then, from the depths of eternity, the silence stirred. Not broken, stirred, the way a breeze touches water before the wind is born. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep. His presence hovered over darkness that was not evil, only unshaped. The void was not resistance, it was invitation. And from that sacred quiet, the Word spoke. Not a shout, a whisper filled with power. Sound became light. Light became the first boundary of order. Where chaos had been endless, purpose appeared. Day separated from night. Time began its counting. And God saw that it was good. He stretched out the heavens like a scroll. He gathered waters, shaped mountains, drew the lines of rivers that had not yet been named. He painted the sky with color before eyes existed to see. He filled the air with sound before ears existed to hear. Creation bloomed like breath. Land rose from beneath the waves. Grass uncurled, and trees lifted new arms toward an invisible sunlight. Seeds woke within the soil, carrying futures they could not yet imagine. The air smelled of beginnings, clean, weightless, full of promise. Every movement answered a rhythm older than time. Each command, let it be, became its own note in a symphony of obedience. He spoke, and it was. He looked, and it was good. The oceans bowed, the stars took their places, and the sky learned its blue. Even silence had music. Creation waited, listening for what would come next, for the being who would wake to all this wonder and call it home. Creation had learned its rhythm, but the Creator was not finished. The earth was good, Yet something in him longed for delight, a place not only to exist, but to be with. So the Lord planted a garden in the east, in a land that would one day be called Eden. He planted it himself, not spoken into being like the stars, but formed by hand, like a gift. It was unlike any other place beneath heaven. The soil was soft, rich as promise. Every grain held sunlight. The air shimmered with peace. He drew rivers through it, 4 streams that wound like threads of silver through green. One would water the trees, another would sing over stones of gold, another would breathe life to distant lands. Each flowed outward from one source, as though even water remembered oneness. He filled the garden with every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good for food, cedars and figs, pomegranates heavy with sweetness, vines curling in quiet joy along the banks. Leaves whispered like prayer when the wind moved through them. Color bloomed everywhere, greens so deep they seemed to hum, flowers radiant as morning laughter. Light rested differently here. It softened, slowed, and lingered. Even the shadows felt safe. The garden breathed in rhythm with its maker, a living cathedral without walls. Birds took flight before names existed. Their wings scattered joy like seed. Animals stirred in the grass, small ones first, then great ones, each turning its head as if waiting for someone to arrive. Every creature carried innocence. No fear had yet entered the air. The lion slept beside the deer. The hawk shared the sky with the dove. Nothing prayed, everything praised. The Lord walked among them, not distant, but near. His steps made no sound, but the leaves bowed as he passed. He looked upon the garden and smiled. Each detail pleased him, for every part reflected his nature. Strength without violence, beauty without vanity, order without control. At the heart of the garden he placed 2 trees. The first, the tree of life, its branches clear as glass, its fruit shining like amber in the sun. The second, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, just as lovely, its leaves whispering secrets of choice. One was gift, the other boundary. Together they made love possible. For without the freedom to choose, obedience cannot be love. The Lord looked upon the work of his hands, and the garden looked back, alive, breathing, ready. Everything waited for its caretaker, the one who would name and tend and walk with him in the cool of day. The rivers sparkled under a rising sun. Birds filled the branches. The trees swayed in expectation. The air carried a fragrance like joy about to speak. And from the dust just beyond Eden's gate, the next act of creation began. The garden waited. Every leaf, every stream, every creature seemed to hold its breath, as though creation itself knew something holy was about to begin. From the soil of the earth, God stooped low. The same hands that had drawn mountains now cupped the ground. He gathered dust, simple, unremarkable, soft as memory, and he began to shape it. The clay yielded beneath his touch. He traced the outline of arms, the curve of shoulders, the place where thought would one day rise. Light shimmered across the form, but it was not yet alive. It was beautiful, but still. Then, in a moment the universe would never forget, the eternal bent close. No angels sang, no thunder rolled. There was only the sound of breath. He breathed into the nostrils of the man the breath of life. It entered the form like dawn entering darkness, gentle, complete, unstoppable. Clay became flesh. Stillness became motion. The heart beneath his hand began to beat. The chest rose and fell with rhythm new to creation, and man became a living soul. The first thing he saw was light reflected in the eyes of his Maker. The first thing he felt was warmth. The first thing he heard was love breathing his name. No word of introduction was needed. He knew instinctively to lift his face toward the one who had formed him. It was not worship as command, it was gratitude made natural. The Lord smiled. He took the man by the hand and led him into the garden he had prepared. Every color seemed to bow as they passed. Birds quieted, then sang again in wonder. Even the rivers slowed their song to listen. The Lord placed the man among the trees and said, "All this I have made for you. Keep it, tend it, and it will flourish." He spoke not as ruler, but as father. The words carried both trust and tenderness. The man looked around in awe. He felt the texture of bark beneath his fingertips, the softness of moss beneath his feet. He smelled the sweetness of figs, the cool scent of water running nearby. Everything was new, and yet nothing felt unfamiliar. It was as if the world recognized him, as if each living thing knew he was part of its purpose. He named the creatures as they came, gentle names that fit like clothing. The deer approached without fear. The lion bowed its head. The dove alighted on his shoulder, and the man laughed. It was the first laughter in creation, and heaven rejoiced at the sound. In that laughter, God found delight. It was the echo of his own joy returned to him. The Lord watched as the man explored his gift. He saw curiosity, gratitude, wonder, but also the quiet question of solitude. He waited, letting the question ripen, for even in perfection, desire for companionship was holy. The sun sank lower. The sky turned to amber. The first shadows lengthened across the grass. God walked with the man in the cool of the day. Their steps matched. Their silence was peace. The day was finished, and nothing yet had learned to hide. Above them, the stars awakened. The world exhaled. The Creator looked upon what he had made, the rivers, the mountains, the sky, the creatures, and now the man who bore his likeness, and saw that it was very good. The words were not spoken loudly. They were breathed like blessing, a quiet joy that filled the garden's air. And in the hush that followed, the breath he had given the man rose back toward him in silent worship. Life answering life. Goodness recognizing its source. Morning came gently to the garden. Mist lifted from the rivers, and pearls of dew clung to the leaves. Birdsong threaded through the branches, and the air smelled of peace. Adam walked the paths of Eden, his hands brushing over bark and blossom, his feet warm against the earth. Every creature came near without fear. The deer bowed its head. The dove circled once and landed on his shoulder. The lion blinked with quiet strength. He continued to name them as he went, each name fitting as though it had always been waiting. The world listened and answered him. But as the day stretched on, a thought began to stir, a small space between joy and wonder. Everywhere he looked, there was togetherness. The birds flew in pairs, the foxes played in twos, even the trees leaned toward each other as the wind passed. The garden was full of companionship, and Adam began to feel its absence. It was not pain, only a question. Who would answer my voice? God watched in silence, letting the question deepen until it became prayer. Love never rushes its answers. It waits until the heart is ready to receive them. Adam worked and walked as before. He tended the vines and cleared the paths, But in his heart a quiet longing grew, not for more beauty, but for someone who could see it with him. At sunset, he sat beside the river. Water moved softly over stones. The sky turned gold, then rose, then deepened into blue. He watched two small birds fold into one another's wings, and the sight filled him with a sweetness that hurt just enough to make him sigh. The Lord's voice came, not as thunder, but as tenderness. It is not good that the man should be alone. The words were not rebuke, but promise. Something new was about to unfold. Not correction, but completion. Adam lay down in the grass, the earth warm beneath him, the air still around him. Sleep came upon him like a slow tide. The stars brightened overhead, and as he drifted between waking and dreaming, he felt the nearness of the one who made him. Hands working once more in love. The garden grew quiet, its breath held in expectation. What would come next would not take from him, but give to him what he could not give himself. Night deepened, the rivers whispered, and love prepared its next breath. Night had deepened, and Adam slept beneath the stars. The garden was still. Even the rivers seemed to hush. Their song slowed to a murmur of waiting. The Lord drew near. From the man's side he took one rib, and from that living bone shaped another form. He did not begin from dust this time. He began from life already breathing, so that the two would share one essence, as melody shares its origin with the note that began it. The work was quiet. The moonlight fell soft on the ground, and in that holy silence, the first woman came into being. Her eyes opened to starlight. She breathed the same air, heard the same rivers, and yet saw them new. The world looked different because now it could be shared. The Lord brought her to the man, not commanded, but presented, like the closing of a circle long prepared. Adam woke. His eyes adjusted to dawn, and there before him stood the reflection of something he'd only felt, the answer to the ache he could not name. Wonder passed through him like light through water. He rose, and words came from him without learning or effort. This one, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. His voice trembled with joy and awe. The garden seemed to listen. Even the leaves stirred in response, as if they too recognized completion. The Lord watched and was pleased. There was no hierarchy in this moment, no grasping, no fear, only union. The image of God, now reflected in two faces, stood side by side. The man looked upon her and saw not another servant, but a counterpart, equal, distinct, a living echo of divine imagination. And the woman looked back and saw in his eyes the same breath that filled her own. They laughed softly, not because anything was funny, but because joy needs sound. The garden carried their laughter like fragrance. The animals paused to listen. The air shimmered with delight. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." The words were not command but invitation to create as He creates, to give as He gives, to mirror His love in their joining. No shame shadowed them. No fear touched them. They stood together beneath the trees, clothed only in innocence, and the light that fell on them was enough. Evening returned, and the Lord walked with them in the cool of the day. Three voices, two human, one divine, blended in perfect ease. No barrier, no hiding, only fellowship. It was paradise not because it was perfect, but because love was whole. The day dimmed to quiet gold. The woman leaned against the man's shoulder, and the man rested his hand over hers. They watched the first sunset together, and though they could not name it, what they felt was worship, life marveling at its source. Night came, and the garden breathed with them. All was peace, all was home. The sun lowered slowly, its light turning the garden gold. Warm air moved through the trees, carrying the scent of ripening fruit and damp earth after rain. Birds called once more before resting, their notes soft and satisfied. Adam and the woman walked together, their steps in time with the heartbeat of the land. Every sound around them answered that rhythm: the rustle of branches, the hush of rivers, the whisper of wind folding through tall grass. They worked as they had been taught, hands gentle, eyes bright. Nothing resisted them, nothing feared. The vines yielded easily, and the soil seemed glad beneath their touch. As evening deepened, the voice of the Lord came through the garden. It was not thunder, it was familiarity, the sound of one who had walked this way many times before. They turned toward it without fear. The cool air touched their faces. They felt known. He spoke with them, and his words were like rest given shape. He reminded them of the gift and the boundary. All this is yours to enjoy. But of the tree in the center, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. His tone held no threat, only love guarding love. The woman listened quietly beside the man. For the Lord had first spoken these words to Adam alone, and when she had come into being, he had told her what love had asked them to remember. It was not commandment that bound them, but shared trust, a promise between them and their Maker. They nodded, understanding in the simple way that innocence allows. Freedom was still new, but trust made it effortless. When the conversation faded, silence returned, thick with peace rather than absence. They sat beside the water. Fireflies began to drift above the reeds, their light pulsing in slow harmony with the stars. The woman rested her head against Adam's shoulder. He traced small circles on the back of her hand, learning tenderness as one learns a melody by heart. The night air cooled. The moon rose pale and kind. Every creature had found its place. Even the lion slept. And above it all, the Lord watched and was pleased. This was what he had intended: creation in conversation with its creator, work without weariness, desire without fear, love without shame. The world was whole. The garden breathed evenly, as though it knew that tomorrow would come just as gentle as this day. And somewhere beyond the horizon of their knowing, another presence stirred, not yet near, but curious. It waited for its moment to speak. For now, though, all was well. Adam and the woman lay down among the soft grass, their fingers intertwined, their hearts untroubled. The stars wheeled above them in patient light. The Lord blessed the night. His peace rested on them like dew, and Eden slept, bathed in its own quiet perfection. Morning opened softly over Eden. Light moved through the trees like a quiet stream. Every sound was gentle. Water touched stone. Birdsong lifted and fell as though the air itself were breathing. The woman walked among the branches, calm, unhurried. Her hands brushed fruit that hung heavy and sweet. Peace answered her wherever she turned. Nothing warned of danger. All was as it had always been, order wrapped in tenderness. From the edge of the shade, a voice spoke. It did not startle. It arrived like a thought that asked to be heard. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field that the Lord God had made. It said to the woman, "Did God really say you shall not eat from every tree of the garden?" The question sounded simple. It did not accuse. It only asked her to look again at what she already knew. She turned. The creature was near, yet not threatening, its eyes alive with patience. "We may eat the fruit of the trees," she said, "but from the tree in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor touch it, lest you die." Her voice was steady. The command had never felt heavy. It had felt like love. Love drawing a boundary so that love could remain. The serpent's reply came like cool wind. "You shall not surely die." The words did not shout. They placed a small weight upon her thought. For God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. The garden did not change, yet something within the moment did. The question had moved from the rule to the heart behind it. Was the boundary given for love or to withhold? Her gaze turned toward the center. 2 trees stood there, one of life, one of knowledge. Until now, choice had been simple. Trust had made simplicity sweet. The serpent did not press. It waited. Its power was patience. It let her own desire rise to meet it. She remembered the voice that had formed her, the kindness that walked with them in the cool of the day. No lack had ever lived here. No need had gone unanswered. Yet the words lingered. You will be like God. Not rebellion, only likeness, reached by grasping. It sounded close to something true. They were made in His image. They were called to reflect His care. What harm could there be in wanting to see as He sees? A small tilt appeared, not pride yet, only curiosity without rest. She spoke softly, more to herself than to her visitor. God has given us all of this. We are free among His gifts. The serpent inclined its head. Then surely this one also. The words settled like dew that does not lift. The fruit had always been lovely. Now it seemed to wait for her. She stepped forward. The garden did not resist her. It breathed as before. Behind her, silence urged her on more than speech ever could. She thought again of that word, lest. Lest you die. It had once sounded like care. Now it felt like a door to something larger. The serpent's first question returned. Did God really say? Not what did He say, but did He? Not the command, but the character of the giver. It was only a small turn, yet the whole of trust depends on that angle. Adam appeared on the path. He turned toward her as one turns toward familiar joy. He saw her near the trees and paused. The serpent waited for them both. Its craft was the pause that lets a thought grow. No hand was raised, no force was used. Only a truth, bent by half a shade. The woman looked from the fruit to the man she loved. No distrust stood between them. Only the quiet wish to understand more than they had been given to carry. Wisdom is good, said the thought. It did not say, God is not. That is how the whisper works. It separates the gift from the giver and asks the gift to prove his heart. The air grew still. Birds hushed. The river seemed farther away. Nothing had broken, yet everything leaned toward change. She looked again. The fruit was pleasant to the eyes. bright as though it held its own light. Two thoughts stood side by side: trust, which asks no proof, and curiosity, which asks for sight. She did not move. The man stood beside her. The serpent's eyes waited, steady as time. Silence gathered like evening. Eden remained bright. The Lord had not turned his face, but the slope had shifted. The heart had leaned toward an answer that was not trust. The whisper had done its work, and all that was good waited to see if it would remain unbroken. The light had not dimmed, yet the air felt changed, not darker, only different. The garden still sang, but a faint note of sorrow now moved beneath the melody. The woman stood before the tree. The fruit hung low, glowing with quiet invitation. It seemed to hold more light than the leaves around it. Her hand hovered near. She saw that the fruit was good for food. She saw that it was pleasant to the eyes. And in that seeing, she began to want what had not been given. It was not hunger that moved her, but the thought of more wisdom, more understanding, something beyond the boundaries of trust. The man watched her. He did not stop her. The stillness between them was not defiance. It was confusion, love uncertain of what to do when wonder reaches beyond command. Her fingers brushed the fruit. It was cool, smooth, without resistance. The world did not shake. The sky did not cry out. She simply took it. And when she bit, the sweetness spread across her tongue, like tasting light, but light that burned. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The trees still swayed. The river still flowed. The birds still sang. Then her breath caught. A heaviness entered the air, the sound of knowing too much. She looked at the man. He saw something in her eyes that had never been there before: awareness and the ache that comes with it. He took the fruit from her hand, not forced, not deceived, only unwilling to stand apart. He ate also. And as soon as he swallowed, the garden exhaled. The wind rose through the trees. The light trembled. The stillness broke. Then the eyes of both were opened. They saw that they were naked. Until that moment, innocence had been their clothing. Now, awareness became their shame. They looked down at what had always been good and felt exposed. They gathered fig leaves, pressed them together, and covered themselves. The sound of the garden changed. The birds flew higher. The wind turned colder. Even the river seemed quieter, as if it too held sorrow. The woman looked toward the path where the Lord usually walked in the cool of the day. The thought of his approach, once joy, now filled her with unease. The man reached for her hand. Their fingers met, but the peace that used to live there was gone. In that small ache, the space between what they had been and what they had become, sin entered the world, not as thunder, but as distance, not as punishment, but as separation. The garden did not curse them. It simply could not stay the same. They moved through the trees, seeking a place to hide. Their steps were hurried, their breath uneven. The voice of love that had always found them was about to call again. And though they did not yet hear it, the story of grace had already begun to stir. The same love that formed them from dust would one day redeem them from it. But for now, they hid. In the garden, once their home, waited in sorrowful silence. For a heartbeat after they ate, the world held its breath. Then creation exhaled in sorrow. The light that once moved freely through the leaves grew soft and strange, as though it could not find home upon the ground. The river's voice lowered to a muted hum, and the wind, once warm with laughter, turned cool and distant. Even the soil beneath their feet felt different, no longer effortless, but heavy with knowing. The animals that had grazed nearby lifted their heads and withdrew into the trees. The air carried a quiet ache, as if the very fabric of life had been pulled slightly apart. Where harmony had sung, now a discordant note lingered, not loud, but unmistakable. It was not anger. It was grief. The garden was not cursing them. It was mourning with them. Every root, every wing, every ripple of water seemed to ask, "What has changed?" Nothing visible had yet died, but death had entered, a shadow without a shape. The man and the woman felt it without knowing how to name it. The beauty around them remained, but it had lost its ease. What once embraced them now stood at a distance. They had not only broken trust, they had broken rhythm. And the garden, which had shared their joy, now shared their sorrow. The afternoon faded into stillness. Light, once warm and full, thinned into pale gold. A breeze moved through the garden, stirring the leaves as if searching for something lost. The air felt different now, not empty, but uncertain, like a song that had forgotten its next note. They heard him before they saw him, the familiar sound of the Lord walking in the cool of the day. It was the sound that had always meant joy, until now. When they heard his steps, they hid among the trees. The same branches that once bowed to his presence now trembled with them. They pressed close together, breathing hard, fig leaves rustling against their skin. Then the voice came, not thunder, not anger, only heartbreak wrapped in gentleness. "Where are you?" The question moved through the air like a sigh. It was not for location, it was for love. The one who knew all things was asking the one thing only freedom could answer. Adam swallowed. His throat was dry, his heart heavy with a fear he had never known. He stepped from behind the trees, eyes low, voice small. "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Afraid. The word had never belonged here before. It hung in the air like something foreign, a wound that had no name. The Lord's voice was steady. "Who told you that you were naked?" No accusation, just sorrow shaped as a question. "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat?" Adam's breath quickened. The ache of guilt sought a place to rest, and found it in blame. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate." The words came easily, but even as he spoke them, he felt their emptiness. The woman stood behind him, eyes wide, heart breaking in silence. The Lord turned to her. "What is this that you have done?" Her voice shook. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." There it was, the full circle of fear, blame flowing from one to another like a river finding every low place. Love had not disappeared, but it had fractured. Then the Lord spoke to the serpent. His words were firm, measured, final. "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all beasts. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He shall crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel." A promise whispered into the wound. The first thread of redemption sewn into the fabric of loss. To the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to Adam, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat of it.' Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life." The garden listened in silence. Even the wind seemed to grieve. Yet hidden within his words was mercy. The curse fell not as destruction, but as preservation. They would not live forever in their brokenness. Death would come, but so would deliverance. It was not the end. It was the beginning of redemption's long road. Evening gathered over the garden, a quiet gold that softened every line. Adam and the woman stood together, fig leaves pressed clumsily against their skin. They did not know how to be at peace with what they had learned. The world was still beautiful, yet now it felt far away. Then the Lord came near. He did not raise his voice. He did not turn away. He looked at them as a father looks at children who have stumbled, with sorrow for the bruise and care for the healing. Adam had named her Eve, mother of all living. The name sounded like a lamp lit in a dim room. Life would continue, though pain would shadow the doorway. Promise had not withdrawn. It had simply moved deeper. They stood before God with their small coverings, leaves already curling at the edges. Shame had taught them to sew, but shame cannot make clothing that lasts. Their hands had tried to fix what their hearts could not mend. So the Lord God made garments of skin, and he clothed them. The words are simple. The act is holy. They watched his hands work, the patience of a craftsman, the tenderness of a parent. The garments were soft, strong, and warm. Not the brittle hush of leaves, but a covering that held. He lifted the first piece and wrapped it around Eve, drawing it over her shoulders with care. He placed the second upon Adam, settling it against him until it fit. They had covered themselves to hide from God. God covered them so they could stand before him again. Nothing in his touch was harsh. There was firmness in his words about sorrow and toil. Yet in this quiet clothing was a different message, a kindness that spoke without sound. You are not abandoned. You are still mine. They felt the weight of the garments and also the weight of grace. Something had been given in their place, a life taken so that their shame might be covered. Scripture does not linger on that detail, yet the pattern is clear. Without the shedding of blood, there is no covering that truly lasts. Here, at the edge of Eden, mercy sketched the first shadow of the cross. The garden listened. The wind moved softly through the trees. No longer only music, now also a lament. Yet even the lament held hope. The Lord had spoken of a seed who would crush the serpent's head. Clothing and promise stood together, a pair that would one day become one story. Adam looked at Eve, and Eve looked back at Adam. Their eyes still carried the ache of knowing, but beneath the ache was something steadier. They were not alone in their loss. God had stepped into it with them. They breathed more evenly. They stood a little taller, not because the curse was lifted, but because love had entered the curse and would bear them through it. The Lord's hands rested a moment on their shoulders. That touch said what words could not. You will labor, yet I will be near. You will suffer, yet you will not be forsaken. You will die, yet death will not be the last voice. The new garments held the warmth of his nearness. They would remind them that God would not let shame be their only memory of Eden. Each morning, the cloth would rest against their skin, a quiet certainty that mercy had moved first. They stood in silence while the light thinned to silver. Birds settled into the branches. The river slowed its voice as if to listen. In that hush, they learned a first lesson of grace. God does not cover to pretend nothing happened. He covers to walk with us through what did until a greater covering makes all things new. Night approached. The entrance to the garden glowed with a brightness they had never seen, a sign that the way back would not be theirs to take. Yet even as the gate began to shine, the garments held their promise close. If God gives a covering for this day, he holds tomorrow also. Adam drew the garment closer at the neck. Eve gathered hers at the waist. They did not yet know the roads they would walk, the field they would break, the children they would hold and mourn and hope for. They knew only this: the same God who named their sorrow had also wrapped them in compassion. They turned once more toward the trees that had been their home. The leaves stirred as if in farewell. No anger, only the softness of a world that would remember them. Then they faced the edge of the garden, where love was waiting on the far side of loss. The Lord stood with them a final moment in the place where innocence had ended and grace had begun. His presence was steady, his mercy near as breath. They were clothed, they were covered, they were not cast off. And the first steps beyond Eden did not begin with nakedness, but with the warmth of God's own kindness upon their shoulders. The night was deep now, yet the Lord's voice had not gone dark. Amid the sorrow of his words came something bright, a promise, small yet eternal. To the serpent he had said, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall crush your head, and you shall bruise his heel." No one fully understood what had just been spoken, yet the air itself seemed to listen. The stars above trembled in their places, as if creation recognized the shape of salvation hidden inside that sentence. A seed, a child not yet conceived, a life that would one day walk the ground of sorrow and press its heel upon the voice of deceit. The serpent's triumph was already unraveling, even as the dust of its victory settled. Adam looked at Eve. He did not see the one who had given him the fruit. He saw the one through whom God would bring healing. In her weakness lay a new strength. Through her pain would come deliverance. What sin had opened, grace would one day close. And Eve, though her heart ached, felt within herself a faint stirring of hope. Not life yet, but the quiet knowing that life would come. She placed her hand over her chest and whispered the words she barely understood. Life will rise again. The Lord's promise lingered around them like fragrance after rain. It did not unwrite the curse. It wove mercy through it. It did not deny death. It declared that death would not speak last. Somewhere in heaven's mystery, the Son already stood ready, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The cross, though far in time, was already present in intention. The promise did not stop at Eden's edge. It traveled forward, moving through generations like an unseen current. It would whisper to Noah beneath a rain-dark sky, and a rainbow would remember it. It would call to Abraham beneath foreign stars, and his descendants would carry it in their blood. It would echo through prophets and psalms, through exiles and kings, through the longing of a people waiting for dawn. And when the appointed time came, the same word that had spoken light into being would take on flesh and walk among those who sat in darkness. The serpent's lie would be unmade not by force, but by love strong enough to enter suffering itself. The seed would come, not with sword or crown, but with hands open, bearing the mercy first breathed in Eden. And from his wounded heel, a river of life would begin to flow, clearer than the one that once ran through the garden and wide enough for the world. The promise that began in sorrow would find its fulfillment in song. The first wound of humanity had already drawn the first mercy of God. The couple did not yet see how far love would go. They only knew they were not left alone. The God who had formed them was still writing their story. And in his story, endings always open into beginnings. The serpent withdrew into shadow, its hiss fading into the dust from which it would crawl. Yet even there, beneath the earth, it knew that its dominion was temporary. A seed would come, a heel would crush, and light would break through again. The Lord looked upon the two he had made. He did not revoke the work of his hands. He simply changed the way he would walk with them, no longer side by side in innocence, but heart to heart through faith. He would speak to them in memory and in promise. And one day, through that promised seed, he would walk among them again in flesh. The night grew still. A thin line of pale silver touched the edges of the sky. They felt the cool air on their faces, the warmth of the garments he had given, and the weight of his words resting gently between them. Eve turned to the Lord and whispered, "Will you remember us?" He answered, "Not in thunder, but in truth, I will remember, and I will come." Then silence, not the silence of distance, but the silence of promise kept in waiting. The stars faded, and as the sky softened toward morning, hope quietly learned to breathe. Morning touched the horizon with pale light. Mist lifted from the rivers and drifted through the trees, softening everything it touched. The garden glowed as if it were already remembering them. Adam and Eve stood near the edge, where the earth opened toward the unknown. Behind them lay everything they had known, the trees that whispered peace, the river that caught every ray of sunlight, the paths that had learned their footsteps. Ahead lay soil unturned, sky unmeasured, a world waiting to be named again. The Lord went before them. He did not drive them out with anger. He led them away with mercy. Love was still their guide, even as love led them beyond the garden's edge. When they had crossed its border, the Lord sealed Eden with light. A brightness rose at the entrance. It shimmered like flame, yet did not consume. Cherubim took their place within that glow, and between them turned a sword of fire, its motion guarding the way to the tree of life. It was not a wall of anger, but a mercy that kept them from eternity in sorrow. To live forever in brokenness would have been the cruelest curse. So God, in love, kept the way closed until redemption would open it again. They stood a long time, watching the light move over the gate. The sun dipped beneath the hills, and shadows lengthened across the earth. Evening came without the garden's familiar song. No river nearby whispered to them. No light poured through branches that once knew their names. Adam gathered fallen sticks and stones, uncertain what to do, but doing it anyway. He struck two stones together, and when a spark caught, they watched in wonder as flame rose between them. For the first time, light came not from heaven, but from their own hands. They sat close beside it, listening to the small crackle of warmth. The glow painted their faces in amber and gold. It was not Eden's radiance, but it was enough to see one another. Eve drew the garment around her shoulders and rested her head against his arm. The night was alive with new sounds, the cry of distant creatures, the hush of wind over open ground. Every noise carried both promise and fear, yet above them the same stars shone, patient and unchanged. They remembered the Lord's words, the promise spoken before the gate was sealed. It was not the comfort of return, but the comfort of hope, that he would remember, that he would come. Adam lifted his eyes to the sky. The constellations burned quietly, their light crossing endless distance to reach them. He thought of the voice that had once walked with them and the ache that now filled its silence. Still, when he prayed, the silence seemed to listen, and that was enough. He reached for Eve's hand. They did not speak of sorrow. They did not speak of fear. They simply held on, as if holding was itself an act of faith. When sleep finally came, it came gently, not as the peace of innocence, but as the mercy of exhaustion. The fire dimmed to embers. The stars kept watch. And in the hush between breaths, the world began again. Hello again, friends. The story we have walked together tonight is old as the dust beneath our feet, yet it still breathes. For Eden was never only a place, it was the first home of the human heart, the place where trust began and where it first broke. We have watched the garden bloom in light. We have heard the whisper that bent its song. We have felt the silence that followed the fall. And through it all, one truth has remained steady. Love has never left us. When God called, "Where are you?" He was not seeking information. He was inviting return. He was already preparing the path back, through promise, through time, through the heart of the one who would one day walk among us again. The story of Eden does not end in exile. It ends in mercy walking beside us. The same hands that clothed Adam and Eve still cover our shame. The same voice that spoke judgment still speaks grace. And the same promise that a seed would come, that love would triumph, still lives in every dawn. We too live east of Eden. We work, we ache, we long. We build small gardens with our hands and our hearts. And in each one, God still meets us in the cool of the day. He still asks gently, "Where are you?" Not to condemn, but to remind us that we are found. The cherubim still guard the way to the tree of life, but the way itself is no longer closed. At Calvary, the sword of flame met the Lamb of mercy, and the way opened again. Now, through the Christ, who crushed the serpent's head, the path back to life stands clear. What was once guarded for our sake is now kept for our return. Revelation tells us that the river of life will flow again, clear as crystal, and the tree will bear its fruit for the healing of nations. And there shall be no more night, for the Lord himself will be our light. Until that day, we walk as Adam and Eve walked, covered by grace, held by promise, guided by mercy that knows the road home. So as you rest tonight, let the story settle gently in your heart. You are not far from that same love. It moves through the dust of every ordinary day. It waits in every dawn. It walks with you in every evening. Let the garden's memory rest upon you now. The river's song, the whisper of leaves, the breath that gave you life. Breathe in slowly. You are still loved by the one who made you. Breathe out gently. You are still covered by his mercy. Rest now. The garden sleeps, but its promise remains. You are safe. You are held. You are home.